funding for this program provided by the Lower Colorado River Authority, a nonprofit agency providing flood protection, electricity, and environmental services to more than 50 counties of Central Texas.
The story of America is about rivers. They have shouldered the growth of a nation. The settlement of the United States would have been much more difficult without rivers to lead us. Running waters set free the visions of explorers, and it was rivers that prompted the dreams of a new world. There are few places where water has been more critical to development than in Texas. Early settlers could not stray far from the riverbanks because the arid southwestern frontier was so unforgiving. The best way to see the future was to look into the river, and the river that runs to the heart of all things Texan is called the Colorado. The Texas-Colorado River. Its history has been as turbulent as its waters. For centuries, it sustained the Native Americans who lived and hunted along its banks, and later the brave adventurers of its untamed frontier. Today, more than 1 million people rely on the river to help support their modern lifestyles. The devastating floods and the choking droughts which once ruled the river have been tamed by a series of dams. Still, the Colorado River has left its eternal mark on the heart of Texas and on the spirit of the dreamers and doers who have been drawn to its banks. In 1718, French traders first mapped the Colorado. Its waters are fully contained within Texas borders. The Colorado flows more than 600 miles to the Gulf of Mexico, and its basin drains more than 41,000 square miles of land, roughly the size of the state of Ohio. This abundant waterway begins in one of the state's driest locations, the desert caprock of West Texas.
Right here, it begins to look like, when you talk about a river, and this being the headwaters, some people come out and they think, you know, there's just a big gushing stream flowing up out of the ground and a river starts. Well, that begins to take on the characteristics there. You got flowing water, and it's good clear water. And of course, when it starts out heading southeast, 605 or so miles from this point is Matagorda Bay. But where you start here and you run all the way to Matagorda, all those people along that river, we sort of feel like there's some tie between us and the people. They're all the way down there. Yeah, when you float by, you wave to them.
But this is more than just the beginning of a river. It is the beginning of a run under the sea. James Pickard is a retired nuclear engineer and a businessman.
Get her in the middle.
Wait a minute, let's just lift this baby up.
Winfield James was the publisher of the New York Daily News. Harry Caldwell owned a music store. His friends describe him as a mechanic with magic in his hands. But the three have carried another name with them as surely as the ones their families gave them. For more than 50 years, these men have been known as the Abilene Boys. The boys have become men, but they have not completely surrendered their youth. 54 years after the three of them canoed down the Colorado from the desert to the Gulf, they have decided to do it again.
A lot of people, when they heard that we were going to do this time, really thought we were out of our minds. And one example was, she's now a woman, and of course she was young girl in the days when we went the first time, and we happened to run into her in Abilene, and we were talking about this, and she said, "You guys must be crazy." Says, "You darn near killed yourselves the first time. How come you're trying to do this again?" Now, that was an exaggeration because we didn't have too hard a time the first time we went, but I think we must have given people the impression that we endured a great many hardships.
They are three men in their 70s. Two recently have had heart surgery. One of them hates to camp, and the sun burns through its unrelenting summer sweep across Texas. But they will not reconsider.
Just being 70 doesn't mean anything except you've lived 70 years if you're lucky. And you'll be 70 someday if you're lucky.
Okay, why don't we just get that canoe off of there?
I just think it's a mistake for people to be limited by their age. If there's good health, it doesn't matter how old you are.
Let's go. Let's get it off of here.
I just have no reluctance. I had none from the very beginning or at any time along the way. And I know a lot of my friends have said, "I think he's foolish." He's had a heart bypass, a major open heart surgery, and a pacemaker and all these things. But he's a good, healthy man now.
The formative events of lives often are products of chance. In 1937, the Abilene Boys were teenagers who came across a canoe hanging in a garage. And for reasons they are still trying to explain, they put it into the Colorado and pointed themselves toward the sea.
I can just visualize those three boys who didn't want to work for the summer, can't you? And deciding that they had this canoe that wasn't doing a thing, and they just get it down out of the garage and take it on the river and do what they did.
They called their canoe the Juicy Jessie because she leaked so much and constantly needed repairs. But she was strong enough to accomplish her two main tasks: get them to the Gulf and keep three healthy teenagers out of work for most of the summer.
Well, Abilene is hot and fairly boring into 1937. And we were just shortly out of school. Parents were thinking we should go to work. Saw the canoe hanging up in, I guess, the Pickard garage, and thought it'd be great to take a canoe trip, and that began the odyssey, I guess. We expanded from there.
Work might have been hard for the boys to find in their hometown during 1937. Like the rest of the nation, Abilene was slowly pulling itself up from the Great Depression. Any good job was likely to be offered to an able-bodied man with a family to feed. The railroad and agriculture were the staples of Abilene's economy at this time. But youth needs adventure, sometimes more than it needs work or food or even love. The Abilene Boys had a small party at home, and then they gathered with a few friends at the river in Ballinger, and they left on a trip which made sense to no one but them.
We went down to the river in the morning. I think 3 or 4 cars went with girlfriends and mothers, and arrived at the bank of the river, and which was a muddy hole in those days. The river wasn't running like it was this time. And of course we got in the canoe and waved goodbye to this very small band of people. Quite a contrast to what we encountered this time, when I think there must have been 100 people down there.
Why did you decide to make the first trip 54 years ago?
Do you think you can stand each other for 4 weeks on a river?
Probably not, but there isn't much choice. You can't just walk away at that point.
More than a half-century has passed, and the Colorado River still holds on to a part of them.
Let's go. Let's get it off of here.
Their doctors are worried about the arduous nature of the journey. Their children are apprehensive. And the general public is both fascinated and baffled.
Why did you want to do this?
Well, everybody asks us that. I guess it comes down to a sense of adventure, and doing not a lot of adventures left these days. and it's a chance for the three of us to be together. We haven't had that kind of time together, and to see the great changes that I'm sure are taking place in this river.
She goes off pretty fast, so if you fall in, you're down deep. The rocks, too.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
A few moments after departure, the Colorado issues them a warning to take along on the rest of the trip. Before well-wishers and with television cameras recording the indignity, the Abilene Boys capsize.
I was doing my job up front, and somebody back here goofed. That's all I can say.
But somehow or other, we all leaned in the wrong direction at once, and over went the canoe, and there we were, up chest deep in water, and all our gear hadn't fallen out of the canoe, but it was fortunate because some of it wasn't tied in.
Water was just a little rougher than we thought it was. So we didn't manage it very well, and the next thing we knew, we were over and in the water. And we didn't lose anything but my hat and my glasses.
The day required readjustments. The river banks are not as steep when you are 17, and canoes are not as heavy. They were prepared, but slightly out of practice. Harry, Winfield, and Jim had been on only 2 canoeing and camping trips in their entire lives. This was the second.
A lot of ways to skin a cat, eh?
Unlike their excursion in '37, when the river was barely flowing, heavy rains have provided them with a swift current. Around every bend lies a potentially dangerous set of rapids.
Jimmy was always concerned that there was disaster ahead, that we had to be very careful about this upcoming rapids, and we consulted our journal of '37 where we had had some accidents, and as we approached those areas, Jim was very cautious and wanted to pull aside, and he was always looking for the disaster.
They spend the day confronting the unexpected. The Colorado was more river than they remembered, and the condition of their lifelong friend Harry Caldwell complicates the danger. Winfield and Jim had been concerned from the outset about Harry's ability to endure the trip.
Well, I think it became apparent to us that Harry wasn't up to his old self. He wasn't physically performing as we thought he could and had in his past, in the past. And he seemed to be forgetful and having trouble expressing himself and remembering things. And it was pretty apparent that the tasks of staying with us on this trip were just going to be too much.
They made camp the first night, knowing that the morning would force upon them one of the most difficult decisions of the entire trip.
But we talked together about this and pretty much decided that we had to talk to him the next day, but we decided to sleep on it. And when we woke up in the morning, I think we were more firmly of that mind, and when opportunity presented itself, why, we took a little walk up the road and chatted with him about it.
After only 2 days, Harry Caldwell was forced to withdraw from the trip. The 100-degree heat and the physical demands of the river strained a heart that already had performed a lifetime of work. In keeping a promise made to his daughter, Caldwell climbed out of the canoe and left the trip to his 2 boyhood friends, with a demand that they never look back. Saying farewell to Harry reminded Winfield and Jim of how their friend's capable hands had been able to keep their first canoe patched and afloat during their 1937 trip. And it reminded them that time was flowing by just as surely as the river.
Harry was the mechanic, guy who could fix anything, very easygoing, a very relaxed guy.
Harry was always happy and always pleasant, always thought the best of people.
The three of us spent lots of time together, enjoyed each other's company, and we were very fond of him, still are fond of him.
This was a big old field here, and 2 days ago there wasn't no water on it. Now the lake's pretty well inundated here.
The Abilene Boys quickly find themselves dealing with more than just the changes within themselves.
Okay, this is where FM 2134 came across the lake. We just come across the old Lee Day crossing behind us, which is now about 56 foot underwater. And here you can see the highway going underwater. This whole bluff here and all will be underwater when the lake's full.
The river is now a lake in many places. The Colorado is broken up by 9 dams, and the Abilene Boys now find themselves encountering Lake Ivy, the newest reservoir. There was a fierce public debate over the building of a dam here, and although the lake is a welcome sight to parched communities in West Texas, it marks the loss of another part of the river.
I know there are, in the environmental movement, I think, is now generating a feeling that we shouldn't be damming up these rivers. We should leave them in their natural state, and because in the long run, the lakes silt up and the lakes cover up the habitat of various species, and great many objections have been raised to building dams on rivers. But you know, this is the real world, and the human species is something you've got to give some thought to. And I think the real skill in this is marrying the interests of and the needs of the human race with the environment it lives in.
The water itself changes as it enters Ivy Reservoir. Here, the muddy brown of the river gives way to the deep blue lake. That afternoon, tired and hot from paddling, the Abilene Boys bathe in the cool waters of the Colorado.
Well, good morning, world.
God, the machine is running this morning. Lord save us.
In time, their campsite will be at the bottom of the rising Lake Ivy, and Jim Pickard wonders what that will be like. So he begins planning another Colorado River trip.
50 years from now, it'll be well underwater. We'll fly by then. You won't see us, but we'll fly by as the devil's emissaries.
But in their mortal incarnations, the only way to see the Colorado is by paddling.
Next lake coming up. I enjoy being in the river. I enjoy paddling in the river. I enjoy canoeing in a river, seeing the sights and so forth. I don't particularly like to do it if you're going to be in the midst of that terribly hot sun or pouring rainstorm, which I prefer the rainstorm than the sun. But the river it's a quiet, relaxing place if you can be there and not feel that you've got to hurry to the next bend, if you can enjoy the scenery. And the rapids, the fast water are exciting. It's a challenge to find the current in the river. It's really a nice thing to look at the vegetation, to spot the wildflowers and things, and the wildlife. It's interesting.
They admit to being unlikely adventurers. Jim Pickard is a nuclear engineer whose company has helped to design and build power plants around the country. During World War II, the U.S. government enlisted his abilities to help in the Manhattan Project, the construction of the world's first atomic bomb. He wears a pacemaker and has had open heart bypass surgery. Still, he manages to impress his lifelong friend, Winfield James.
We never had the time to spend together such as we've had this time. And I think he's an outstanding character and a very fine man and has accomplished a great deal. And I'm very proud to be his friend.
Oh, he's a great guy. Always ready to help. And that's an outstanding thing about Winfield. He wants to do something that's constructive. On this trip, I knew what he was thinking, he knew what I was thinking, and we could accomplish things without even saying a word.
After about a week of paddling in 1937, they came upon their first real obstacle.
Thursday, July 31st, 1937, day 9. The holes of water are longer, but filled with trees that have washed down during the floods. About 3 years later, we came to a cement dam which backed water for 2 miles. At the dam, there used to be a sawmill and a flour mill, but they washed away during the September flood. Found a pretty good camping site early, so we decided to stop and fish. Had no luck. Got some milk and eggs from a farmer, and talked to an old farmer boy who'd rather talk than eat.
The dam was still there in 1991, but there was no trace of a mill. There were, however, people who loved the river and who would still open up their homes to strangers.
One of the afternoons after we'd had a very tough time getting around one of these low dams that have been built across the river for irrigation purposes, and we were really exhausted. And there was this small house over 150 yards away, and we went over there to inquire if these people would mind if we just camped the night there. Pretty soon one of the children came down and said, "My mom and dad want you to come up and have dinner with us."
Well, he couldn't believe that somebody just moving in, house, didn't know who they were, would just take them in off the river, how they were, invite them into the house, and offer them beans and cornbread, and just sit down and chat like we'd known each other forever. I like adventures, people that are adventurous, and I admired them for doing it. It was something that I'm glad my kids got to see that. I really am.
Y'all doing all right?
Yeah, fine, thank you.
How far did you come from?
Ballinger.
Good Lord.
10 days and 200 river miles from where they began, the Abilene Boys push on at a rate of 20 miles per day. They found the upper third of the Colorado still a wild and scenic place, a place where the forces of nature remain in charge. Their doctors suggested to Winfield and Jim that they might do well to forego this trip, but they did not listen much better as men than they did as boys. Realizing they would not be deterred, Winfield's physician urged them to exercise prudence.
I think some of our families thought we were a little crazy to take this on. But we didn't really ask our doctors if we could go. We told them we were going and what did we have to do. And the advice we have is to be prudent. So that's what we're trying to do.
So they named their canoe Prudence and then exercised the hell out of her. Many of the people the Abilene Boys met along the Colorado had thought about such a trip, and the reaction they heard most often was, "I wish I was going with you." They might have thought differently after an hour paddling Prudence through a Texas summer day.
This is the worst part of the day. Because you're tired and hot and sweaty and dirty, and you want to get a nice clean shower and cool off and have a nice drink of, oh, well, you know, whatever.
The day's heat often was followed by evening thunderstorms.
I think Texas doesn't know how to have just a nice gentle rain. This is the only way they know how to do it down here.
Camping frequently became more of a necessity than a pleasure, and the night storms made it even more trying.
This is the third time we've gotten ready for one. Fortunately, it's before dark, and it makes it a little easier. But let it come up at 4 o'clock in the morning is when it usually comes. That's when things can get a little wild. We have to go sit in the tent to keep it from blowing away.
Well, my honest description of camping is I really don't like to camp. I never did like to. Don't like to now, don't expect to. This camping was just a means of getting this project underway and getting on down the river. I know there are people who like to do it, but it's just a dreadful chore.
On the 12th day of the Odyssey, the Abilene Boys enter the Texas Hill Country. Here the muddy riverbanks rise up to become spectacular limestone cliffs.
Those are very spectacular. Suppose it is affected by last night's rain. But when we came by here before, it seems to me that I remember them being smaller and less significant than the Gorman Falls. These are beautiful.
Passing by Great Falls and Gorman Falls, the men approached the gateway to Lake Buchanan. In 1937, this was the point where the Abilene Boys would encounter their first real lake, created by the original dam built across the Colorado. This lake, which has risen to the size of the Sea of Galilee, is a monument to the day the future arrived in the central Texas Hill Country. When construction began on Buchanan Dam in 1934, electricity already was a way of life in the rest of the nation. But the Texas Hill Country still was trying to see into the future by the flickering light of kerosene lamps. Electricity from this Depression-era project would revolutionize life on the remote farms and ranches in the rugged hills of central Texas. Buchanan Dam would end the decades of hauling water up from wells by hand and would cast an electric light upon the books which children and their parents left half read beside dim lanterns and the fading glow of fireplaces. Today, the clear, clean water of Lake Buchanan attracts an abundance of wildlife, including the American bald eagle. But the gusty winds which lift the wings of eagles also present a significant obstacle for the Abilene Boys.
And if the wind's blowing as it usually is out of the south, that we're heading right into it. And you simply can't paddle against any kind of a strong headwind. You just stand still, so there's no sense in trying. And that's why we don't hesitate to take a tow if anybody wants to pull us through those headwinds. If it were a good tailwind, it might be another matter.
We're about to do some paddling by 175 horsepower Evinrude outboard motor. Man, this is living, isn't it?
The Colorado used to run through here unharnessed and unobstructed. But when people came to this region, a compromise had to be reached. The middle stretch of the river is now dotted by a series of dams that create the Highland Lakes chain. The Lower Colorado River Authority built and manages the dams, which provide electricity and flood control for 41 Texas counties.
I think the corralling of the Colorado has been good in protecting life and property along the river and in producing a couple of good products, water for irrigation and electricity for consumption.
Whether they like it or not, the Abilene Boys are celebrities by now. Not even a quick stop in a country store goes by unnoticed.
Are these a gentleman from, started out around San Angelo or somewhere out there, and I read about them in the paper? Great. Yeah, they did this when they were young men. I read about you in the paper. Glad to meet you.
Winfield James.
Janet Christian. Glad to meet you.
Janet. Where are your dried prunes?
Next to the last aisle.
I expected them to have bigger hats.
People are tracking their progress daily and are anxious to catch a glimpse of the pair.
It's unbelievable that they've attempted this kind of a thing. And evidently are going to come through on it. Do the whole bit, the whole 9 yards. It's wonderful.
As they maneuver around Buchanan, the Abilene Boys dread the thought of getting around the next 5 dams that lie ahead. Each portage will present a unique challenge and require a unique solution.
Oh, that was perhaps the most exciting portage around dams that we had. Out of the 14-odd portages, that one was really exciting. We arrived at this dam, which lay between 2 vertical cliffs. On top of the dam, a truck that had a winch on it that let a line down with 2 slings, which were put under the canoe, and with all its gear in it. And as we watched, they simply lifted the canoe straight up by the winch on this big truck up at the top, up the 40 feet, swung the truck around, dropped the canoe down the other side of the dam, some 80 feet to a very rocky riverbank where 6 husky guys, employees of the Max Starkey crew, carried old Prudence for about 200 yards along that rough, rocky shore to a place where we could get in her again.
As their canoe was carried below the dam and put back into the water, the man who had organized their assistance offered up a now familiar refrain.
I wish I was with them. I would really enjoy it.
By June 25th, the Abilene Boys have spent 15 days on the river and covered just under 300 miles. As they enter Lake Travis, they are amazed at the beauty and the development. The shores are now lined with elaborate homes, and the lake has become the playground of Central Texas. The 65-mile-long lake also provides flood protection for millions of people downstream. They camped peacefully along Lake Travis until the next morning, when they were introduced to a pest they had not encountered on their first trip, fire ants.
Woo, look at here, we got ants in here.
The next morning, the waters of Lake Travis were still as they completed their trek across the wide open lake. Below Mansfield Dam, the narrow banks of Lake Austin were a welcome sight.
That's one more big piece of concrete. It'd be a big mess if it broke, wouldn't it?
As they neared Austin, the Abilene Boys' accomplishment was beginning to attract national media attention. After 300 hard river miles, Winfield and Jim were looking forward to a reunion with their old friend Harry.
I'll be happy to see you, old Harry, and see what he thinks of our getting this far. And tell him how much we miss his cooking. Especially I miss his cooking, because Winfield can't cook for sour apples.
Winfield and Jim followed the draft of a stern wheeler down Lake Austin to their meeting with Harry. and kept offering the same advice to those who said they too wanted to make a river trip.
Get yourself a canoe and come with us.
As Winfield tells these people that say, gee, I wish I could go with you, get yourself a canoe and do it. That's all you got to do. If you got the desire and the interest, what's stopping you?
Harry stood impatiently on the bank as Jim and Winfield pulled into shore. For 2 weeks, he had followed their progress through the newspapers and was anxious to hear their stories about the journey.
I need a crutch. How you doing, old buddy? Good to see you.
The three of them camped that night the way Winfield liked it, indoors. Their host was Dudley Fowler, a lifelong river resident.
Sir, you guys certainly looking nice out there.
Well,
that canoe just moved right along, very nice.
As long as you give it muscle, which doesn't last all that long.
The next morning, the Abilene Boys are a trio once again. Although he will join them for just one day, Harry Caldwell sits proudly in Prudence. The stern-wheeler Commodore escorted them down Lake Austin toward the last dam they would have to encounter.
They don't recognize me. I'm William Couch.
I do. I sure do.
Good to see you.
Haven't seen you in a
Oh,
case.
Winfield James,
I know
how are you?
Winfield, yeah.
Glad to
I grew up
see you.
1 block from you and 3 blocks from you.
And the Abilene Boys continued to encounter old friends who had heard about their adventure. By the time they reached the state capitol, their personal adventure had become a public story. Austin was a town of only 60,000 when they came through 54 years ago. On this journey, their canoe is dwarfed by the skyscrapers of this growing city of 500,000, many of whom have lined the banks to welcome them back again. In '37, they camped unnoticed in Zoker Park. Today, they're flanked by an armada of reporters and photographers, and tonight's accommodations will find the Abilene Boys resting comfortably in a high-rise hotel.
Well, you can't recognize it. Wouldn't seem like the same place. I think the Capitol building was the tallest thing by far, the most prominent thing in the skyline. What a reception.
The first 2/3 of the river, the hardest part of the trip, was now behind them. But they wanted to remind people that the most difficult time for the Colorado lies ahead.
And I just hope that if our effort here doesn't do anything more than just focus a little attention on the question of where are you going 50 years from now? Let's think about it. Let's spend some money and time and effort on planning ahead.
Jim and Winfield also knew this would be the last day they would spend with their ailing friend Harry, and wanted it to be special.
We feel so great to have Harry with us again, and so good to see him. And we have one more little gift for him, which we hope he will prize. It is a picture of the three of us launching the canoe from Ballinger 54 years ago. Maybe you could open that up.
And they're paddling all the way from Ballinger to Matagorda Bay. Abilene Boys are coming.
The entertainment was provided by members of the Colorado River Watch Network. They're valued more for tending to water quality than for singing.
Make some dinner and make some noise. Tip your hat to the Abilene Boys. Yay!
Boy, that is terrific.
The biggest threat to the Colorado is non-point source pollution. Every rain brings rafts of urban runoff down the creeks and into the stream. The young volunteers of the River Watch Network monitor the river's quality and provide information to state officials. They discover and help correct pollution problems, and they are persistent enough to ensure the river will outlast the deluge of styrofoam cups. With the highland lakes behind them, the river becomes a river again. The banks are thick with willow trees which provide shade for the Abilene Boys. But they remember that the dreaded water moccasin also enjoys the cool limbs which drop to the water. The gentle current now moves Prudence along with little effort.
The ideal thing, as perhaps we've said before, is travel in the shade with the wind behind you and the current underneath. You hardly ever find all three of those at once.
Jim has figured out that they are each paddling at a rate of 20 strokes per minute and calculates it would take over 168,000 strokes to complete the journey.
I hope you guys are stopping because we got lunch for you.
You have?
Great. Yeah.
We don't miss that.
Do you have time?
Sure.
Come in for refreshments.
For lunch we always have time.
Can you make it, sir?
When they started their voyage 23 days ago, Jim and Winfield made just one rule. They agreed never to turn down a tow, a dry place to stay, or a hot meal. For many communities downstream of Austin, the passage of the Abilene Boys gives them an opportunity to refocus their attention on the river.
Now therefore be it resolved by the City Council of the City of LaGrange that the work of Winfield James, James Pickard, and Harry Caldwell be saluted and that their efforts be fully and completely recognized.
The river's lower third becomes almost a celebration tour for the Abilene Boys. They knew they were going to make it, and the people they met in places like LaGrange gave them confidence the river also would make it.
Some of these communities saw the opportunity to put forward what they were doing about the river, and that we were a vehicle through which they could present this. And they certainly have done a lot. There certainly is a lot going on with the help of LCRA and others. They're researching their history, they're fixing up their riverfronts, they're building parks, and they're doing quite a lot.
This lower stretch of the Colorado is wide and flat. At times, the Texas heat can be brutal. But there is no way to stop them after they've come this far. Besides, every time they step on shore, they're met by either an old friend or a new one.
My Lord.
Glad to see you.
Hi, how are you? Hi, good to see you. My goodness. No, we all went to school in Abilene together. And I hadn't seen or heard of these guys since graduation. They went one way and I went another.
And that's exactly the way this chance encounter ended. The only way to see the Gulf is by pushing more water behind Prudence.
Welcome to Columbus. We're here to greet you. Hi, yes, my name's Tanya.
Tanya, good to see you.
Are y'all tired?
I'll say, we're always tired, I think.
Have y'all gotten wet?
Well, we got rained on.
This also is Tanya's first day on the job as Miss Columbus. When word got around that the Abilene Boys were arriving, city leaders corralled the prettiest girl they could find and named her Miss Columbus without a contest.
We have our county judge here and our mayor and everybody we could get out here at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Let me get this up just a minute.
But we felt like you'd enjoy seeing Miss Columbus better than anybody.
We want to welcome y'all back to Columbus.
Thank you.
County.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate y'all
Thank
being
you.
here again.
Columbus was one of the most memorable stops on the 1937 journey. The Abilene Boys had discovered a sign hanging from a bridge asking them to report to O.A. Zumwalt in town. He turned out to be the mayor and a part-time Associated Press correspondent. The story of the young Abilene Boys becomes statewide news.
Friday, July 16th, 1937. After dinner, Mr. Zumwalt sent a telegram to the AP, then took Harry and me back to the river along with a dinner for Jim. At the river, he took our pictures about 6 times, and later we had learned that those same pictures appeared in newspapers all across the state.
On July 5th, 25 days into the trip, Prudence floats into Wharton. Getting out of Wharton the next morning will not be so easy.
We were a little concerned about leaving the canoe by the dockside, and we inquired what might be done about that. And it was suggested that the police would be delighted to take it over and keep it secure for us until the next morning. And when we got down to the dock the next morning, we were kind of surprised to find out that we weren't going to be able to get away quite as quickly as we thought. We've got an imprisoned canoe. This is in the local Wharton lockup, it looks like, outdoor lockup. There are 2 keys on the door, and apparently the county judge has one and the sheriff's office has one, and we're not going to get in until we get both keys. One key is in the hand of the executive branch of the government, and another key is in the hands of the legislative branch.
Nearing the Gulf, the Colorado's character changes again. The terrain is flat now and the river wide. Rice farmers contract for much of the water contained in the highland lakes hundreds of miles away to irrigate their fields.
Yep, there's another example of pollution right there. People don't have the right regard for this place.
The side effects of man's dependence on the river are sorely visible.
Well, we just noticed the pollution of the river by people throwing junk in it in the last 3 days, I'd say, 3 or 4. Not before. And where it was fairly heavily populated along the river at various points, people didn't seem to be messing it up. But here, obviously, people are taking advantage of over the bank and out of sight. Seen automobiles and barn doors and construction debris and everything.
Just 2 days from the Gulf, the unpredictable river throws another obstacle in their way.
I think there's too much danger of it flipping there. I think there's too much danger of it flipping in there. Come on back up here.
The temperature is over 100 degrees, and the portage over this last obstacle will take all of their strength.
Ready? Go! Okay.
One last driving thunderstorm is the final hurdle for the tiring men. They are close, and they sense victory.
I'm happy to see it coming to a conclusion. Happy we were able to achieve what we set out to do. And amazed at all the hospitality and friends we've made up and down this river. Been a terrific experience.
There is one last stop for an early celebration. Reporters from across the state have come to ask them the how and the why. And the Abilene Boys continue to divert attention away from themselves and back to the Colorado River.
We thought we'd go down here and have a nice little quiet trip down the river, and it's turned out to be more than that. But in a way, that's good because, in my mind, it focuses on the river. It shouldn't focus so much on two old guys as it should on the river, because that's the thing that's unique and the thing that's going to be with you for a long time, and you really ought to pay attention to it and think ahead.
The 1991 journey of the Abilene Boys takes almost exactly the same length of time as the one they made as teenagers 54 years earlier, 28 days. But this time they would not finish in obscurity. Winfield James knows a little bit about what interests the public. He was the publisher of the New York Daily News, and no one is more surprised at the attention than he is. It's quite a contrast from the 1937 finish.
Well, it sure was. There really wasn't any excitement about our arrival in Matagorda. A few people acknowledged, oh yeah, we heard about you guys, but there certainly wasn't any press attention or anything like that.
Their arrival at Matagorda Beach in 1991 was slightly different.
Well, I think, of course, a whole myriad of things go through your mind under those circumstances. We were delighted to have successfully completed this, although we never doubted that we would. It was good to have it done and no disasters and no problems of any real consequence. I guess we were sort of basking in the glow of all that attention. It's been a beautiful river, a challenging river, and a sometimes very unforgiving river. But what has overwhelmed us, I think, more than anything has been the hospitality and the kindness of Texans who have greeted us and opened their hearts and homes to us on the way down the river.
The purpose of any adventure is to enhance the quality of life, and that may be the legacy the Abilene Boys leave to the Colorado River and its people.
But more importantly, you started out 54 years ago, and at that point in time, I think there was more a sense of conquering the river. You saw a river that hadn't yet been conquered. Today, I think what we see through your trip is not our role as conquerors, but rather our role as custodians, and whether or not we really can do the far more important work of taking care of this river that you just so gloriously paddle down.
Prudence has now found herself a small part of Texas history. The Abilene Boys gave their girl to the Lower Colorado River Authority to assist in educational projects concerning the river. A river could not have better friends.
Well, all right, go long, Prudence, baby. Thank you for the ride.
Inside of everyone there lives a child that never grows old. Sometimes we can learn to ignore it, but if we're smart, we'll listen now and then to the call of childhood and adventure. We have no choice but to grow old, but we do have choices every day that help sustain the world of our youth. If we're careful how we treat the rivers and forests and valleys that we loved when we were young, then that world will be waiting for us. And we should never forget to dream. The dreamers and adventurers among us are the ones who accomplish great things. The Abilene Boys will not tell you that their trip on the Texas-Colorado River shaped the course of their lives, but they will tell you that it made them less afraid of taking chances and of following their dreams around the next bend. But there is one other belief they hold for certain. The journey is the thing, not the destination. And those of us who have stood upon the riverbank and watched them pass are still wishing we could go along.